So I don't know, Rian, are you going to get us another judge, or am I going to go with Mutungisa?
Peter, as Josh gets a judge, my teammate is Kandre, I think. Could you give us like, can let me just disconnect and be in our prep room, then you will um let us know when the judge is in. Yeah, then we can join.
It's cool with me. I don't know about Mutungisa though. I already logged out. Yeah. All right, guys. As just give me a second.
Oh, Peter, what could be the issue? Are there teams that we don't have also any judges that are missing?
Currently, we are missing one judge. TJ was supposed to be here, but I think because Rian is looking for somebody, he'll give us some information. Speria, can you kindly unmute yourself because you've muted plus your mic and your headphones and you can't hear what we're saying, and this is critical information. Lawel, please pass that information to her. Yeah, we have Joshua, Kingdom, and Vincent. They're going to be here. Let me just get them. All right, I think as we're waiting for Rian to complete this small issue, let's just do a bit of mic check just to make sure that all of us who are going to be debating actually have great network and can actually connect when the time for debating comes. I'm going to start off. I'm going to be your panelist. My name is Peter Elianu. I think after this, Mutungisa will say a few words. Yeah, and I think we shall keep the ball rolling from there.
Chat testing. My mic audible. This is Brian from Black Hawk.
Yes, you are. Are you using the same device or your partner is also in the room?
We shall use the same device.
All right, then. I think it would be best if you introduce yourself and let us know who would go first.
I will go first as no bad.
All right. Well, where is Peria? Well,
Am I audible?
yes, you are audible. Where is Peria? I can see you
Let me
alone.
look for her. Let me look for her. She had just called me. Hello.
Okay. We're just going to do this one last time, just for clarity. OG, are you guys here? If you are, kindly unmute and let us know that you hit both speakers. Well,
My, my name is Lawel. I'm here. I'm the Prime Minister.
My name is Feria and I'm the Deputy Prime Minister.
all right.
Hello.
We can tell that the mics are really good. Yes, hello. Carnage, we can hear
I'm
you
not
guys.
I'm not but Mawayela and the leader of opposition.
On N Road, Brian Diello.
Okay, that is we got CG. Trust that you guys are here.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear, sir.
Yeah, government whip. Joshua is government member.
Okay. We have CG and lastly CO. CO, are you guys here?
We are around. I'm Kalunjin Raymond, and my partner is also inside. Is another Harold. We shall be updating you on the roles we shall be taking when the time comes.
Does someone seem to be speaking because I clearly don't get anything? Or can I be heard?
Yeah, it can be hard. I think you just have to reconnect. I've been hearing clearly, so maybe you just have to reconnect to something. So yeah, that is CO. Hi guys, once again, my name is Peter. I'll be a panelist for this round. Mutungisa will be our chair. I think he's going to say a few things. Mutungisa, if you can hear me, kindly unmute and introduce yourself and what you expect from the debate. Here.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Since network is not so reliable, so we'll also have to ask for confirmation. Am I so audible?
Yes, yes, you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, welcome everyone to this debate round, the semi-finals. I'll be Edgar Mtundisa, and I'm going to be the chair in this room. Congratulations on past rounds where we could not have met due to different circumstances and reasons. But I'm really glad to meet you and congratulations for reaching this stage. It's amazing, and of course we expect top speeches that happen in such rooms. Otherwise, I'd like to confirm. I think you have the motion. This house supports the requirement of clerical celibacy. If you have any objections, that's not a motion, you can please indicate in the chat space. And so because you're already out of time, I think the same rules are going to apply. Yeah, I think there was 7 minutes that you were using. And that's what you're going to be using this particular round. Yes. Without due, then I would like to invite the Prime Minister to start the debate.
First of all, I would like to know if I'm audible once again.
Yes,
Yes,
you are.
yes.
You're ready.
First, before I start recording, if you, my pronouns are he and him. If you have any PY, you just unmute in the 5th minute and ask once. Please don't badger. Maybe I would like to thank CAP for giving us an excellent panel. I'll be starting in a few seconds. A second. Okay, I'll start. In 3, 2, and 1. This house supports clerical celibacy as a requirement. What this essentially means is that religious leaders, for example, as a requirement, are supposed to be celibate. That is to say, they are not married and are not engaged in sexual activities. This is akin to the Catholic faith, where sisters, brothers, or priests are not married, for example. The origin of this comes from those who read the Bible, Matthew 19:27, where they say that Jesus himself was married to the church, and therefore it's an emulation of his work. Others originate from Leviticus, where some individuals used to inherit land from God, and others merely inherited God. So that is like the history around syllabus, especially around the Catholic Church. But what I would like to say before we enter the matter in the debate is that the role and the utility we get from religious institutions does not come from its history or the consistency of the facts that constitute a religion, but rather its symbolism and the role it plays and how it affects and shapes society. That is to say, how, for example, it fosters society order, behavior, and shapes members within the society. I think that is the utility that we gain from religious institutions essentially. It doesn't matter whether you're a believer, that you benefit from these things that are taught and emulated by the church. But for today's debate, we don't want to focus really on religious validity, but on how such a requirement would impact sexual reproductive health. How are we able to maximize, for example, religious institutions to make sure that we extend our message and we have like a reduction in sexually transmitted diseases, or like we have a good sexual reproductive health sensitive society? And we think that clerical syllabus in and of itself is very essential. First, we think that the significance of clerical celibacy, one, is a symbol of fidelity. The idea that an individual can be able to stick to one's faith. In this, as Catholics believe that essentially these individuals are sort of godly earthly gods, or they're next to God. The significance is that these individuals are not willing to share their hearts with any person except with God. That sense of fidelity itself, we think it has an impact on religious followers. The idea that individuals can stick and can be faithful to what they believe in. Things like being loyal to one wife, right? The idea that you can choose not to divide your attention, you love to different men, etc. We think is very important for society. Second level, we say that what it also preaches is it fosters the idea of abstinence. We think as activists of sexual reproductive health that the best way to prevent the population, or like the most affected individuals who are from the area of age of 15 to 25 from contracting AIDS, STDs such as HIV is to preach abstinence. But we seem to lack role models within our society who can talk to these kids and tell them it is possible for you not to engage in with multiple sexual partners, or in any case, not to have sex at all until you get married. We think when you have role models in society like religious leaders who essentially don't have sex at all, we think it fosters, it preaches, it gives confidence to everyone that it is indeed possible for you to abstain, as opposed to saying it is inevitable, that it is inherently a healthy demand that you must have sexual intercourse whenever you want. We think the idea that there are people who are actually making it, we think is very important. Why do these priests have this duty? We think first is that it is a choice they make, that they want to become role models in this society, that they want to preach and convert people to what they believe in, that they have given themselves to be the change they want to see in society. And we think as a ripple effect, these priests have been able to actually represent that priests are like the light of society. So we think that one, they have a duty, for example, to be role models to our society. We think that is important. Why do we think that this move essentially is going to be effective? We think it is going to be effective because we think, for example, in the most developing countries where we have challenge with sexual reproductive health, where we have a lot of STDs and problems with pregnancies, etc., that these individuals are inherently religious. Like most of them are religious and subscribe to these religious institutions, as opposed to more liberal countries like Japan and Europe, where, for example, they are non-religious conforming. So we think it's going to be infectious because most people in countries like Uganda, etc., believe in religious institutions. We think one that most of these individuals, like these priests, have already succeeded at it, the Catholic Church. So we think anyone at that standard will actually do it. Secondly, we think that even if these priests, for example, broke that code and they were able to do like what Bishop Untagari did, we think they are correcting mechanisms. We think most followers are able to hold these guys to this standard and tell them, look, you're the people that preach this, you must be able to emulate it, right? So we think that even the followers are able to hold them to that account, and therefore they will be able to like maintain that. So I think this debate is going to be largely why when we support this motion, essentially our burden as opening government is to show we think this is good, that it's a good policy, but most importantly, in solving sexual reproductive health. So what else are we telling you? The idea. There are two things we tell you. One is that really the validity of these requirements, for example, clerical celibacy, is not in the validity of its consistency. It is in what it represents. So we think that as long as individuals are able to realize that a clerical celibacy represents fidelity, we think it is important for our society, for partners to stick to their partners, for them to know that it's that one can essentially love one person and stick to them, right? Secondly, that you're able to foster the strategy of abstinence, because young people are able to realize that it is possible to actually wait to be married for you to have sex, or that because the biggest risk is having sex with very many people. We think if they can understand that it's possible to abstain by watching the role models, we think that we are able to solve the problem of sexual reproductive health. But secondly, we tell you about the role of religious institutions in most of these countries that are most affected, that these are institutions which have a duty to shape this society and protect it. We think the best way they can emulate that in light of sexual reproductive health is by having taking on clerical celibacy as a requirement, right? We think that essentially that is the only way they're able, for example, to extend family advice, right? Family advice, because then they are not conflicted, right? Because if you're married, then you have these challenges and you have these aversions about marriage. But if you are under clerical celibacy, you have studied all this literature, you have the knowledge, just like academicians are not practitioners, they have the best pure knowledge, and also the idea that these religious clerical celibates are seen as pure. We think that is important in them inspiring marriages and providing marriage advice, right? Which is essential for sexual reproductive health, right? We think at the point where they continue to get married, they are conflicted, themselves are disturbed, and they need advice from a neutral entity. So we think clinical celibacy is able to give them that expertise, that knowledge, etc. they need, just like academicians are able to do research and make recommendations without necessarily being practitioners. We think that is important in the fight for sexual reproductive health. We better rest our case.
Oh, thank you so much, Prime Minister, for that beautiful awesome speech. I would like to invite the leading opposition to advance the opposition's case.
be picking POIs in my above my 4th minutes. More especially, I would wish to hear from the CG. I'll be beginning in 3, 2, 1. Panel. We realize that it is a good thing to use the church as an example body for us to send a message of how we can protect ourselves from getting involved into unfaithfulness, getting to abstain, and then get involved in the push away of fighting the spread of HIV and then other diseases that we have in the world. But what we have as a problem with the opening government is through their speeches, they keep on sanctioning the same things of which we feel that in our case, what we are going to tell you is we are going to prove to you why it has not even worked at the moment, and then why it is harmful, and then the value of the member of the clergy marrying. Firstly, they give us the origin of this clerical celibacy as it originates from the Bible. We give to their thinking that it is a good preaching that there are priests in there are priests who are the Leviticus who are talked about in Matthew. But we feel that firstly the history that come with the clerical celibacy comes with an imposition forcefulness. It was forcefully imposed in 1123 and again forcefully imposed on the clergy in 1139. What do we get here? It is not only from the Bible, but then it is a forceful act of putting the priest in that position. Again, also, they get to tell us that when priests go into that line, there is going to be a shaping of and fostering the society. We give you the same question. Why did the Catholic Church break away? There was the people who went to the Eastern wing, which were believing in Lutheranism. And these people have fostered and shaped the society through the preaching, and then not only on the grounds of them having families. Even we see that even when they have families, they foster the bond that they have with their family members. And in the end, we find that this example of their faithfulness to their families have always fostered and shaped society. And then therefore, when they say that a celibate shapes the society, then we have a wait and we see that there are specific churches that have already adopted and have seen themselves prospering and fostering the society. And the issue of maximizing religious, we feel that it is not a point, because we feel that the point of conflict of interest doesn't go in hand, because we see that the idea of preaching the gospel doesn't go with the idea of carrying families. Preaching the gospel goes hand in how you are devoted to it. And we feel that devotion is as a calling, and we feel that the calling that comes that when you give yourself to going into priesthood, it comes with the calling that you're going to be devoted to it. And then therefore, by the fact that the person goes into the seminary and then becomes a priest, and then therefore we feel that that person is enough to stick to the faith that he or she has, and then therefore will be devoted into the church, and then therefore will not have the problem. Then they go and they say that preaching of confidence that can you can abstain. We feel that that is a good position, but we see that the issues of abstinence is not only I thinking that it is from the priest will always abstain. We have seen the Catholic Church always having priests who have always gone in hand into doing what they take as they are illegitimized. And then therefore we feel that these priests always go and they show us the other side, and then therefore it tells us clearly that this thing has not worked out, and then therefore the issue of breaching the confidence that you can abstain hasn't worked out, because we see that even people who go into the training to become priests, there's always what we call permanent deaconate in the Catholic Church, whereby we see that these people are retained into the church because they become permanent deacons, because they have seen that these people have not even gotten have gotten children, and then therefore they have to be retained as permanent deacons, and then they don't make it to become priests. We feel that is harmful in a way that it hampers the idea of people coming to give a calling and be devoted into spreading the gospel. And then therefore that strikes the point that they say that they are sticking to the faith, and then there's the maximization of the religious. Then therefore we feel that from that point they're going astray, and then we don't see it clearly. We even see it clearly that in appointments in the church, the idea that why we oppose even clerical celibacy is because within the church, even if they allow the priests from the eastern wing, the eastern side, who come into the church and they are ordained, we feel that we always see that these people are not taken into the selections as example of becoming bishops and any other rank that they rise to. And then therefore we feel that this clerical celibacy is met with a lot of problems, because we feel that the idea of making the church pure doesn't bring out the objective of the church of spreading the gospel, because we see that it hampers a lot of orientations that we have in the society. And then they say that it has succeeded in the Catholic Church. I've pointed to the hypocrisy that has always been, and the lack of morality that we see that in the priests who go on in hand and even committing what they illegitimizes always. And then lastly they go and they say that they want to see what it represents. We feel that what this represents is a good thing, and then therefore we feel that there is always a loophole, and then we see that there is a harm that comes to society. Firstly, why do we feel that it ain't working? Because we see that when objective are not in line with the outcome, we feel that that's a problem. We feel that and believe that members of the church still go on and they commit their urges of going into sexual lines, and then therefore we feel that this has always made them not to be faithful, and this faithfulness has always not made them to stick to the celibacy principles that are supposed that bring them onto getting into that line. And then therefore we feel that when they go onto the end and they're doing that, this tells us clearly that there's no workability of this, because we see that there are priests who have children outside the priesthood, and then there are those ones who have gotten, and they are put to become permanent deacons because of the aspect that they are not faithful to it. And then we will see that this in the end, because it doesn't work out, it suppresses our sexual orientations in a natural and biological way. We see that as humans, we are not like other animals whose sexual urges are in a move that it should be tamed out. Firstly, even if they say that it is an example, it suppresses the idea that of you being faithful. We see that it is a long run to become a priest. It is from ages of studying in nursery, primary, and then secondary. Then you go to the seminary. What might have happened when the person is in this line here? And then what might have happened in the line that when now you go in the seminary and you feel it. And even if we take it from the life that you are from the seminary, and then you go into the deaconate, and then you go to become a priest, we see that already even still suppression of this the suppression, if it is allowed, that celibacy goes with its neck hold. And we see that there is always an idea of this priest always going and having their sexual desires always served out outside, and then therefore that tells us that the faithfulness has not worked out easily. And then it goes on and affects the church sanctity of the church members who get public attention just because they have not gotten through to the idea of you following the rightful lines. And then therefore this in the end we see that it is going to affect the church's position in enforcing morality, and with immorality and of the church going on and pushing forth. And then also we see that why do we feel that it is harmful? We have told you clearly that it suppresses the national aspect of sexuality, because humans are not like other animals whose sexual desires are supposed to be tamed out. And its implementation is grossly unfair, because converted priests from other churches are not allowed, because we see that it should be an open nexus. And then therefore if endowment is with nature, and indeed and intended as a procedure, it should be given to everyone. And if that right is to be given to everyone, to everyone, then therefore also the priests who are put into the interjection and put into the church, they should be allowed to exercise that devotion as they are supposed to do it. Time up.
Can You're wasting our time, boss. Your time is done. Kindly look at the text when you're doing it. Yes, when you're debating, look at the text space. It's a bit disrespectful.
Okay, thank you, Luvosha, for that speech. But I think I will not make any further comments about the time issue. I need to be cognizant of your clock and how it collects. I would like to now invite Deputy Prime Minister to advance the government's case.
I would like to confirm if I can be heard.
Loud and clear.
Okay, I'll be just a second. So for purposes of engagement, if you do have a POI, I'll be looking at the text space. Kindly don't open, do not tap your microphone unless I allow you to. And I'll preferably take my POIs in the 5th minute, probably towards the end of the 4th minute. Just don't try it in the first minutes. So I'll be beginning in 1, 2, 3. So, Chair, this House supports the requirement of clerical celibacy. Notice that this is a support motion. And entirely what we're supposed to prove to you is how this, in essence, as a characteristic of or the characterization of the opening government, on how it entirely affects the reproductive health of people within the society, but most importantly, on whether or not it is justified, or where do we gain some sort of utility. And I'm going to be doing more of a comparative in my speech than what it is going to look like. Okay, more of a comparative and some sort of extension, right? But Chair, for purposes of context, we need to actualize the fact that most of the Africa, at least 70% of the Africans or developing countries subscribe to religion as per se their kind of role model. At least most of them subscribe to religion. And B, would love to like recognize the aspect or the consequence on which the religion has on A, shaping on the morals of the society, and B, influencing the sort of characterization of how the people in society conduct themselves. Now, having recognized that kind of context, let us now look at how that has an effect on entirely the sexuality of the society in and of itself and everything. So, but before I go to that, let me first do some kind of rebuttal from what opening opposition has told you. Opening opposition has a problem with context and characterization. One, they want to tell you that A, that these people are actually forced to give up their sexual desires. Notice that the action of choice exists ab initio. That is to say that a priest has about 11 years to make a decision on whether or not they want to sacrifice their sexual lives. That is to say that no one is being forced to give up their sexual lives. That one has made that choice to give up their sexual lives. It is only in order that we respect that aspect. But also look at the kind of inspiration it gives to a society. That this person has entirely given up their sexual lives, A, to maintain that kind of standard, but make sure that at the end of the day, they showed a picture to the society that A, abstinence is something that is possible, but B, that faithfulness in and of itself is something that is achievable. Now, on the side of the House, they seem to presume that these people are being forcefully imposed on and they don't have the choice or an opt-out mechanism. Notice 11 years are enough for a logical person to make up their mind on whether or not they're actually able to give up these rights. On the second aspect, they give up. The give up aspect of permanent, because it does not exist in a Catholic society. You're either a priest or a brother or nothing at all, or like any other believer who has sexual rights, who has rights to marry and all that. So we think that even if let's assume that all that I have said is nonsense, right? In a world where we have accepted religious leaders to go ahead and marry, it has not had as much an impact on reproductive health in as much as we would have in the other world where we are able to demonstrate that there's some sort of abstinence that can be achieved. We have seen even these people that have been given sexual rights going outside them. I can give you the example of like Reverend Ntagali, who has the right to marry, but at the end of the day was caught in a scandal of cheating. So that is to say that even in their world, they cannot confer absolute rights of abstinence as much as we would confer on our side of the house. Even if they want to assume that priests have children outside marriage, for a fact that is something that they cannot prove by the fact that they cannot mention even a name that I have mentioned, like Ntagali. So we think that on under comparative, we stand on a better side of the house than them. Notice, Chair, that opening opposition does not even give you any sort of analysis on how that eventually affects the productive health of a person, or on how we get to maximize utility recurring from religion. In context of this debate, it's also important for us to discuss on the aspect of how religion entirely affects reproductive health of the people in society. Now, this is a case that you get from opening government, and this is why it is crucially important. Hey, we tell you that the requirement of clerical celibacy is one that promotes some kind of abstinence. That is to say, the society is able to draw a picture that at the end of the day, celibacy is not something that is foreign or like exotic in nature. That is something that can exist. Even if there is some sort of even if there was to be any sort of like abortion in that kind of world, that is so that if some priests derived away from the goal, we still think that we stand on a better side than their side, because then the majority would be able to be celibates, and at the end of the day, the majority of the people in the society would draw that kind of would confer that kind of example, vis-a-vis in their world where that kind of thing does not exist, vis-a-vis in their world where the only example they have is that we cannot do without sex. That is to say that we all have to marry, we all have sexual rights, and we cannot live without sex. We think that in a world where we provide any sort of utility of abstinence, then we stand in a better world, because, Chair, we can all agree in this house that there is no better prevention than that of abstinence in the real world, right? The second aspect we need to look at is the impact of faithfulness that is provided with this emulation, right? That we think that society is best emulated or like best exempted to actually have some sort of faithfulness in a world where religious leaders, which we agree that a number of people in society subscribe to religion, we are best exempted to have that kind of thing implemented, the aspect of faithfulness within partners, or that aspect of faithfulness to one partner in our world, vis-a-vis their world where we do not have that kind of example, because they have showed you that in their world where celibacy is not contained, where people have nothing to draw from religious leaders except the fact that we cannot do away with sex, you will think then that becomes problematic. But before I proceed, I would like to take a POI, preferably from closing opposition. Okay, there is no POI, so I'll proceed. We think that the arguments of suppression and no workability are those that do not exist in the world of this space. Chair, notice that in my comparison, I have told you that even if there was some sort of miscalculation, that even if we had some sort of priest coming out in our world, we will still stand a better choice. Because in our world we are best exempted, or we're best suited to be exemplary in terms of abstinence, in terms of being faithful, because then religious leaders in our side of the house best put off those characters. That is to say that in their world, what they tell us that, hey, look here, you have sexual rights, you have anything to do. Which I have told you that the best way to exempt and protect people from HIV/AIDS or any sexually transmitted diseases is to abstain. That is so that even other mechanisms that exist within the atmosphere, within the status quo, do not guarantee 100 safety apart from abstinence in and of itself. Now, on a comparative, in whose world do you achieve abstinence? In whose world do you achieve self-awareness? In whose world do you achieve faithfulness? We think that it is on our side of the house, on our comparative. Whereas we agree that we may have some miscalculations where certain people will drop out, but we still think even with those miscalculations, we stand a better chance than in their world. What does then their world teach you? That if religious leaders in and of themselves that have division, remember they have a lot to do. Lowell has already told you about how these people even use this time to be undivided, use this time to preach better, because they're like academicians. You don't have to experience, you don't have to have experience to something for you to be able to preach about something. So we still think that in our world, on regards of how religion can be impactful to society, we still achieve better utility on our side of the house vis-a-vis the opposition. What do you get from that side of opposition? Opposition tells you that these people have sexual rights. No one can do without sex. We think that in their world you cannot preach abstinence, because at the end of the day, all of us are entitled to sexual worlds, sexual abilities. You cannot preach sort of faithfulness, because even within their kind of the house, if religious leaders that are being emulatable to society cannot even abstain, or they cannot uphold whatever it is, because I'm giving you an example that even if we guarantee anything, we can't stop them from doing it, like the example of Ntagadi. So their world is worse off, and in any circumstances, Chair should proceed opening government. I rest.
Thanks so much, Beyond, for a beautiful speech. I now call upon the deputy leader position to advance the opposition's case.
I'll just try to confirm audibility by reading the motion. The motion states this House supports the requirement of clerical celibacy. Am I loud and clear? All right, sir. So I'll be beginning my debate shortly. For purposes of POI, please kindly text in the chat space. I won't be taking any POIs if you unmute and butter into my speech. Right, so I'll be beginning my debate in 3, 2, 1. Panel, notice that at the beginning of this debate, we all agree that, look, we think the church should be used as an instrument in preaching the message of sexual and reproductive health. But then we understand that the church is not able to promote sexual and reproductive health. Now, panel, notice that this debate happens in a context where the requirement of clerical celibacy has been happening before. But then you could ask yourself that what has the role of the church been in preaching the message of sexual and reproductive health? This brings me to my point, ladies and gentlemen. Panel, you see, I'll first start by analyzing the stakeholder in tonight's debate. Panel, we think that if you are to make the church in the best position to preach the message of sexual and reproductive health, then we are supposed to do things. One, we have to put the church in the best position to dispense this message. But then secondly, we have to put the clergyman in the best position to dispense this message at an individual level. Now, how do we put the church in the best position to dispense this message? Panel, notice that one, the church derives its legitimacy from its morality, but then secondly, from its devotion to the cause. Now, panel, why do we think that the case of OG in tonight's debate fails the church as a stakeholder in tonight's debate? Panel, you see, however much the church constructs this requirement of clerical celibacy, it's the same clergymen of the church who actually go on to violate these principles, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the day, the society looks at the church as one that does not uphold its own principle. That is just to say, it looks at the church as one that does not preach them, that does not practice the message it preaches, ladies and gentlemen. So, panel, we think that at a point in time where this affects the legitimacy of the then it doesn't put the church in the best position to actually dispense this message. Simply because even if the church comes to dispense the message of abstinence and fidelity that they actually come to claim about, the society will look at the church as one that does not practice the message it preaches. But then secondly, panel, we have to also make sure that the clergyman as a stakeholder is put in the best message to dispense this, in the best position to dispense this message. How do we do this? One, we do this by making sure that the legitimacy or the morality of the clergyman is actually not affected by our own construction as the church at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So, panel. But secondly, we think that, look, the requirement or the myth that actually one sacrifices his sexual and maybe family life to actually go and serve in the clergy, that is something that does not play, or that is something that is largely mythical. Because however much one undergoes the process of theological training, it is impossible to detach someone from his or her natural and sexual orientation, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the day, if one has entirely missed out on family life and one has the obligation to actually serve in the church, it has an effect of psychological incompetency, in that the person in the mind knows that he has missed the family life, and this largely affects the devotion of this person in his services at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So, panel, notice that at a point in time where the church is not legitimized by the society, and the society does not uphold, or the society does not look at it as an example because it has failed to set an example through its infidelity, then that puts the church in a bad position to actually dispense this kind of messages. But then secondly, if the clergyman has a conflict of interest psychologically, he's not in the best position to actually dispense this message. But then, panel, we also think that if the clergyman has a problem of immorality, or if the society looks at the clergyman as immoral, then at the end of the day, this clergyman is not able to effectively dispense this message. Panel, notice that OG looks at the aspect of miscalculation in the fact that some other people will drop out as a trivial matter. But panel, this is the reason why we think this is actually a very important case in tonight's debate. Panel, the miscalculation that they talk of has grave effects on the stakeholder, that is the church. One, because these miscalculations that they're talking about greatly affects the legitimacy of the church, in that we think that if the society is not able to look at the church as an example at all, then that means the church is not effective in its principles that they have actually come to talk about here, ladies gentlemen, at the end of the day. That is why in my speech I've questioned one thing, that this debate actually happens in a context where the requirement of clerical celibacy actually exists. But then you'd ask yourself, why is it that the church institution has largely failed to actually promote some of these things that they're talking about? It's greatly because the society does not think that they're legitimate, because of failing in the thing that they actually have constructed by themselves, ladies and gentlemen. Notice that notice that the DPM comes and tells us that, look, the concept of choice still exists. But then, panel, we think that this concept of choice is still affected by the intrinsic coerciveness, ladies and gentlemen. Because at the end of the day, because one intends to be a priest, and you cannot be a priest if you're married. This person is actually compelled because of his desires, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the day, panel, we don't think that any choice actually is there at the end of the day. So, panel, what do they come and tell us about? They come and tell us that, look, we think the church should be used as a symbol in impacting sexual and reproductive health. But this is one thing we tell them, that because the church is already illegitimate in the eyes of the society, based on the infidelity that their clergymen practice on these things that they have constructed, the clergy in one is not able to dispense this message. But then they come and tell us that, look, it enforces fidelity that is sticking to one's faith. But then the question at the end of the day is, if the church or the clergymen are not able to stick to the principles that they've set, based on the examples that they've given us and that they've also given, then how do you expect the society or the person that is actually receiving this message to actually uphold to his or her own faith? But then secondly, they tell us that, look, this actually has the impact of making a person choose one partner. But then this is actually the church telling people that actually you should choose no partner at all, ladies and gentlemen. So we think this is a logical inconsistency in their case, because it does not necessarily preaches the message of choosing one partner. But then, panel, why do we think that even if they're trying to say that the church actually enforces abstinence, it doesn't work in their case? One, because we think that the normative effect of legitimizing marriage or sexuality opens the window to actually for the clergymen to actually go and engage in these things outside. So, panel, at a point in time whereby we think that the message of abstinence is not effective based on the legitimacy of the church, then that does not play at the end of the day, ladies and on our side of the debate, what have we been able to prove to you? We have been able to prove to you, one, that this thing has not worked. But secondly, even if it has worked, it has negative consequences at the end of the day, panel. So, panel, on the last point of analysis, we think that, one, a church, or we think that a position where the clergymen are free to marry, we think that by a mere aspect that they have family, they're able to relate better in the matter of family institutions and then in marriages, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day. But then, panel, we think that if we do not allow these clergymen to actually miss out on their family life, then, panel, we think that at the end of the day, we are able to mitigate the effects of conflicting loyalties and have a clergy that is largely devoted to his cause. So, panel, at the end of the day, we feel that on comparison, our policy plays better than theirs. I beg to rest. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deva, all for the beautiful speech. And now we now cross to the closing half. And I'd like to invite the member of government to open the case to the closing government.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, so just give me a second. I'm just trying to get a timer here because I'm not in position to use the timer there. I should be good to go shortly. So, guys, if you have a POI, just unmute yourself.
Kingdom,
Don't, yeah.
before you start, kindly reconnect because you're buffering. Just reconnect. Just reconnect.
Hi, is that better?
Yeah, it's good for us. It's good for a certain time. I wonder if you could get a better place with network, because I'm really, really scared for the fact that you might start buffering and freeze later on. So if you could get a place with better network, it would really, really do you good.
Well, actually, my phone shows me that I have good network, so I don't know.
Yeah, then just hold on. Okay, yeah, you can start. When you go raw, I'll let you know. So when you're ready.
All right, all right. So in case my network messes me up, you kindly unmute because I'm not exactly following the text. Guys, if you have a POI, just unmute yourself just don't overdo it, right? Once you have raised a POI like once, I will have had and I'll take it at my convenience. Once I've taken one POI, be good to go, so I'll not be taking any more POIs. Okay. All right. So the first response to get from the CG team towards OO is the idea that these guys want to portray that if these guys are not involved in families, then they have no authority to actually get people on how family should go and all particular. Now, understand that these guys do not exactly appreciate the fact that this whole notion of celibacy is actually at the heart of identity of certain denominations, right? Understand that the splits that have already been talked about in the opening, some of these actually hinged on this particular.
You know,
Yes.
you
Yes.
started having buffers on your end. I don't know if it's only me, but you're having buffers. Just try and reconnect again.
Okay. Sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Just read for us the resolution to just make sure it's okay. Start with free.
Okay. Just a second. All right. So this house supports the requirement of clerical celibacy.
It's still going on, but I think we can bear with it. So when you're ready, you can count and then I'll resume your timer.
Oh, can I just restart though?
Um, uh, Mutungesa?
Yes, yes, yes. Hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sergio, can I
Can he
just
restart
check?
his speech or something?
Can I what? I didn't hear that.
Can he restart his speech because he's been buffering?
Yeah, I think that would be okay. You were controlling the boat, so yeah, you can proceed. He can restart the speech.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
All right. So what G tells you about SRH and all that, and that's important, but we are going to show you further nuances that need to be understood in this net. But before that, a few responses to what you get from the OO team, right? So the idea that if clerics do not have family, have no obligation sort of comment on what is happening in the families of their flocks and all. We think crucially that this is not is a failure to understand this whole concept and the role that it plays in these certain denominations of Christian institutions. Understand that the splits that have been about, like how the Anglicans left the Catholic Church and all those particular things, came about of the reasons this particular thing. Meaning that if you deal with this policy, you're not just deal with one sort of metric that leaders in churches go by, but you're actually undermining the identity of this particular church. And we think crucially that that overrides the arguments that you get from the OOE. But say the idea that these guys are actually fathering kids, we try to sort of dare the opposition, tell to us what is the percentage of the clerics that are having those kids vis-a-vis the general number of clerics in the Catholic Church. Maybe CEO wants to talk about that, right? So we tell you, we think this particular kind of number is minimal and doesn't exactly override all impact, as we shall be showing to you crucially from side CG. So, panel then, why do we think that this policy should still sort of go ahead? The first thing to tell you, we think that it's sort of separable from the other kind of evils that have been associated with churches in the modern time. Things like, for instance, not allowing women to preach on the pulpit. We think crucially that these particular kind of notions are notions that, for instance, contradict principles of equality that we appreciate in the modern. We think crucially the opposition fails to point out any kind of principle that this particular thing contradicts, and that cannot be weighed in that particular same spirit. But the second thing to tell to you is that there's actually no urgency at all. So, for instance, understand that while this particular kind of policy still exists, at the same time, we still have many individuals willing to be priests, right? So we think crucially the world of urgency could look like if at all we have a crisis where actually no guys are actually coming to the priesthood kind of formation. But it also tells you that the other kind of arguments that we expected from the opposition is to come, for instance, and argue that, for instance, Catholic priests are actually abusing the rights of young kids, and maybe that's what CEO will. But before they talk about that, we tell you that first of all, we think that the criminal justice system can actually able to work around that, right? Because we think development is illegal. Also, secondly, to say that the church has been able to demonstrate that these particular individuals can be penalized, right? So, for instance, there's a bishop in Australia who was dethroned on this particular kind of account. The last thing, panel, that you need to understand, we think that the other thing that you could possibly get from the opposition is to argue, for instance, that there's no involvement of guys who continually be willing to involve the church. But we think that there are other forms of leadership, things like catechism, through which people can actually contribute to the church. Now, that said, what do we crucially bring to you from side CG? Two things. First of all, the idea that we think this particular principle is compatible with the idea of leadership, and that you need to view priests as leaders in the Catholic Church, right? And these other churches that sort of front celibacy. The other idea is to tell you the impact that this will have if at all we go away with this particular principle. Now, first on the idea of leadership, understand that not only in church but also in other institutions, we always have leaders treated to different kind of treatments other than the ordinary people, right? That, for instance, actually overrides the arguments that you heard from OO to say that these guys are not married while the folks are married, right? And that's, for instance, that in army you have things like ranks, yeah? We think actually then that these guys actually just being treated to a special kind of treatment. We think that the opposition team should come and argue to us, why shouldn't we be able to deal with priests wearing collars, but actually be able to deal with this principle of not them being celibates? Because we think that this is but one of the things that actually talk about, sort of bring about special treatment. Understand that this special treatment is really crucial because these guys actually going through different circumstances as opposed to what their folks actually go through. For instance, understand that when these individuals sort of do not get married and all that stuff, they have time on their own, which means that there is more commitment to work, and in that way they are able to execute their roles differently. We think actually, panel, that this is important and we cannot be able to sort of sideline it from side CG. We told you, for instance, that when you look at the role that the missionaries played in coming to Africa and going all over the place, this was enabled in part because these guys had time on them. We think crucially, panel, that this idea is compatible with why this particular individual should be celibates. The idea, panel, that we do is the idea of the impact. Yeah. Now, I've already told you, we think really that this celibacy is not just a one thing that we can just take away from the churches. We tell you that it's crucial, that it's part of identity of these particular churches, right? So what then will become of the church if at all we go past it? Understand that when we go by like a notion that is so crucial to the church, then it means that people will start looking at the church in another view. So they'll be able to say that, so I've done with fundamental things in the church already. Then what of these other kind of minor things? This looks like then that people are going to take the church for granted, right? They'll be like, oh, these guys used to give these things, but after all, this thing is bullshit and cannot sort of continue to believe. We think actually that this is very detrimental, especially if it is to be compared with like the kind of like to all minor kind of argument that you get from the opposition. Think clearly that we cannot be able to talk about that particular kind of thing. But understand that when you look at the genesis of how we actually arrive at where we are, we think crucially that again that explains why we do not exactly think that we can go by back that particular policy. For instance, that the Old Testament there was a priest called Eli, and this guy had his kids, and those kids were taking away offertory from church, and sort of people would bring offertory. These guys would take the offertory, misuse it, and all those particular things. God penalized these kids. I think then that in the modern world, we suffer consequences like individuals being able to take offertory and take the kids to school and all those particular things because of the different economic realities, right? So we tell you that first of all that there is no urgency, right? That tells you the possibility of what will come after in this particular kind of setting. think crucially, Pano was trying to say particular kind of motion is sort of justified. Crucially, we should be voting for it. So, Pano, what then would you bring to CG? Try to get all the alternatives that the option could talk of so that they do not tell you why the particular not bad. But also, I go further and tell you, first of all, why I think this particular kind of principle is justified in terms of leadership since leaders, and thirdly, the kind of impact this will have, which is negative, and why we should not be able to sort of take it on.
Okay, thanks so much, member of Cafe, for a beautiful speech. I will have the leader of opposition, I mean the member of opposition, to paint the closing opposition's case. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll read the resolution to confirm if I'm clearly heard. This House supports the requirement of clerical celibacy. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Oh, yes, yes, you are.
Thank you very much. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel. Religion is opium for the masses, as a certain observer categorically observed. Panel. We as team closing opposition, we bring to this debate 5 major points. 1, the context of the debate, the problem of the debate. 2, justification of our motion. 3, a stakeholders analysis. 4, comparing two worlds. And 5, a cost-benefit analysis. Panel, to this debate, our extension is majorly going to be an analytical extension that will help us delve and understand what this debate actually means. Panel, clerical celibacy requires abstention from deliberately indulging in sexual thoughts and behavior outside of a marriage or no marriage at all, because these impulses are regarded sinful. Panel, it is important to note that celibacy often maligns clergy, produces loneliness, at most leads to alcoholism, and at worst, efforts at emotional compensation through irresponsive exercise of clerical power and unprincipled sexual activity. Panel, clerics say that it is fine a vocation to venture into all this by doing away with the sex and doing away with all that happens as the government teams try to prove. Panel, closing government noted the fact that in as much as clergy may not be involved in family activity, they may have the authority to do so. But panel, it is important to note that experience is the best teacher, and family matters are hard to resolve, even the law is not very clear about them. Panel, they also emphasize the fact that agency does not exist. They emphasize that the evils of this actual fact that is happening in place, that there is criminal justice that is in place to that, and they also bring out a true opinion that clergy or the leadership of the Catholic Church is actually the leadership of the entire of the outside world as a contest, and therefore they also put up a point that celibacy gives these people time to focus on the commitment of God, and that's their work. And by context, we are going to give a brief history of how the Anglican Church, of how the Catholic Church is the only church that is insisting on celibacy, whereas other churches, for example, the Protestant Church, left this a long time ago and they are prospering. No, all churches before at their inception focused on celibacy to, for instance, the Protestant Church among other churches. And this was proven and they saw it not to be right and they left it, and therefore they have seen prospering and existing for more years. However, this is only a preserve of the Catholic Church. No, it is important For it is a simple realization that has caused a revolution in social attributes. For example, it is important to remember how the world and Christians were shocked when Martin Luther King broke his monastic vows and married a nun who had also broken her monastic vows. Panel. This was the start of all those happy, productive clerical households which have been a bedrock to Protestantism. No, it is important to note and to mark out the benefit of the work that Martin Luther King did in his tenure as a priest, as he had broken the clerical concerns or the clerical concerns of not indulging in marriage, and he therefore transformed society, as churches are looked at as a key role in transforming society to pertain all those dire goals. The problem of this debate is the division of the church among clerical celibacy, the freedom of choice in doing God's work, shrinking a number of priests in the Catholic Church, since many of them went to the Protestant church. Many people that would wish to join this noble cause of the Catholic Church are seen to flee from that church and join other churches. It is important to note that these people leave these churches and join other churches so that they can exercise this free will to preach the gospel and to preach the word of God. The problem that we're addressing in this debate is the sexual reproductive health problem in the Catholic community. It is important to note that in as much as this clerical celibacy exists, this does not undermine the fact that sex actually continues to go on. It is important to note that many nuns end up getting pregnant, yet these people are supposed not to be pregnant or give birth at all. It is also important that there are very many Catholic priests that have children and they do not take care of them, as they will be seen to be having children and taking care of them. How does this impact our society? This impacts society as these children will grow up without fathers, these children will grow up without the best necessities of life, and that is very dangerous for the coming community. So as we fulfill our known pleasures of posing around that yes, we are celibate, yet in actual sense we are not. It's important to remember that even if I'm denied a sexual freedom, it doesn't mean that I won't end up getting STDs. In our case, we are going to focus on allowing priests to have sex. We are also going to focus on teaching them the preventative measures of STDs and all those other diseases, other than tying them to one STD fighting measure. It is important to note that abstinence has been noted the best, in quotes, measure of fighting and preventing all these sexual reproductive health problems that come up with, but that has not been the best because biology is biology. Human beings, in as much as they have hormones and they have these reproductive organs, will keep on finding a way to have sex whatsoever. It is important to note that even people in schools, primary schools, for instance, where abstinence is preached and put out on all their signposts and classes, others end up getting pregnant and not undermining the fact. In this debate, we are going to bring for you another lot of points. One, we are going to emphasize how this promotes hypocrisy. Two, how it denies the freedom and right of choice. Three, we are going to emphasize how the freedom of expression, which helps people enjoy other rights, is fully put to drain. And four, we are going to talk about how this destroys the church's image, yet the church must be kept sumptuous and true to the cause. How do these people promote hypocrisy? First, they preach and they pretend to be celibate. Taken. I'm not hearing you. I therefore proceed. The first one is hypocrisy. How is this hypocrisy proven?
Our time is done, actually. Your time is done.
Yeah. All right. My next speaker will proceed with our case and will show you why we win this debate.
Okay, thanks so much, member of opposition, for that beautiful speech. and I would like to listen from the government whip. Government whip, you are now invited to conclude to give final remarks on the government page.
Am I audible?
Yes, sure, you are very audible.
All right, so I think you feel free to unmute and ask your point of information. If there is any, please just don't budge or be respectful. Okay, just double checking if I'm audible to everyone. Okay,
Crystal
confirm.
clear, sir.
All right, so starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is not rocket science that CO is fourth in this debate because we are still waiting for their extension. They tell us about how the Catholic Church lost like from the Pentecostals because there's division. That does not prove anything in this debate. We only get a lecture of the importance of celibacy, which we don't think is anywhere related to this motion. Just to engage them, they talk about how many nuns are sort of having children that are not sort of taken care of. We don't think this is a problem of celibacy. We think there are a lot of street children that exist that don't have parents. We don't see how they actually solve that problem. I think the second response would be the Catholic Church is an exclusive community that has their own rules and regulations. So why should you join an institution that is exclusive if you don't want to adhere to the rules? So we don't think this is an argument that can actually win them this debate. So I think the third response would be there is actually a rise of secularism. That means every religion is actually losing its people. That is why I think there's a lot of increase in HIV because people having sex before marriage when they're not supposed to. That points to a lack of like credibility of religion. We think this is the problem, but we should be addressing why this sort of regulation or requirement of civil celibacy becomes important. I think that ties back to the extension we give to you. One, the role of like clergy, the church, like those individuals in community, and then the image of the church itself. I think those things CO doesn't engage. That already means CO is already out of this debate. Moving on to opening opposition, I think we get like basically three things from opening opposition. The first one is that because these things were forced on clergymen. In response to this, I think there are many things that were forced onto us. Even though we fail at them, it doesn't mean they're necessarily bad. We think there are a lot of people that fail exams, but it doesn't mean the exam itself is bad. So all doesn't prove anything in this debate. I think the second thing that I could say, taxation is actually forced on us, but we still have to pay it anyways. We don't see any reason why it is actually a bad thing. The same thing here. Why is then celibacy a bad thing? I don't think OO was able to prove this. I think the next thing they sort of say, yeah, there are priests that are having sex, therefore this is bad. I think this is not a solid sort of argument to make in this debate, given this is a speculation. So there's a difference between speculation and facts. I think the problem with opposition, they don't engage the alternative. What is the alternative? The alternative is when actually priests sort of have children. What does that mean? It essentially means that now priests don't have like just one loyalty, that is to the church. They have two loyalties. So where would you prefer to put your effort? You're getting offertory. Where would that money go? Would you invest it in building more churches? Would you invest it in giving to more charities? Or would you prefer feeding your children and paying your school fees? I think that is the comparative that opposition sort of misses in this debate. And that is why they ultimately lose the debate because they are not able to explain or conceptualize a world that has religion that like Catholic Church where like priests are actually married. I think this points us back to centuries back when this was actually allowed. What happened then? Priests appointing their own sons to become priests because family bonds are stronger than strangers within the communities, or they prefer like people that are qualified to actually be priests don't become priests because essentially the priests find that my son should be taking on this role. I think that is the problem with having a family. Then the next thing is like focusing on what's best for the child. Now you have a family to focus on. Will you actually devote your time to God or will you devote to your family? Your wife is calling, we need money for supper. Like, would you like actually do what God intends you to do, or like swindle this money and send them this money to your children or to your wife and all that? We think this is the problem with having children. I think just looking at status quo, where are the most problems with churches? Do they exist with the Catholic Church or the other churches that have marriages? Where are churches more exploited? exploitative. Where do you get instances of Tagalis having sexual sort of relationships outside marriages, and what impact does it have on churches itself? We think the impact is actually worse on your side of house because they associate these things with churches, whereas on our side of the house, if priests have sex, it's a speculation because they are not allowed to do that. The question is on what is wrong with that priest, not is what is wrong with the church. So that is the distinction we create as CG, because we prove to you how we maintain the image of the church because they have an image to protect. So when priests start having children, when priests start having women, we think the family problem that is associated with their family becomes the problem that you associate with the church. So to maintain the image of the church, we think priests should have one priority, and that is protecting the image of the church. That is something I think both oppositions were not able to engage. I think the last thing opening opposition talks about is like legitimacy of the church. I think I've already sort of dealt with this. It's sort of a similar thing. There is speculation versus fact. When priests have sex, when priests sleep with none, it's speculation. So that means not everyone believes them because there is no concrete proof, which maintains the image of the church because the contention is the priest itself and not the church. So yeah, there might be like sort of small discussion whether the church is good or not. But I think they maintain the principle of the church is that we don't allow them to do that. So that is the problem with that priest. On your side of the house, when many priests sort of start doing it, it simply means the church has lost control of its priests because priests are now like marrying 5 or 6 wives. That is because the church is complacent. They allow them to do that. So I think essentially means that opening opposition is also out of the debate. So moving on to opening government, I think opening government has sensible argument, but they say they're like just wishes without any analysis to sort of back them. They say that it represents fidelity, that is to say, like priests represent role models within society because they are able to maintain, so that influences other people to maintain. We think this is not realistic because as seen in the status quo, there's a lot of rise in HIV and all that. That essentially points to you how like open government's case is not actually realistic. If this was the case, we should be celebrating it because it's what exists as the status quo. Given that is not true, maybe something they could have said to prove this premise is that like priests have sort of a moral high ground because they are the one to reprimand people that are having sex. So if they are the people that are having sex, where will they get the moral to sort of condemn people that are having sex? So that is the question we ask ourselves. So I think the opening government case is not actually realistic. If this was the case, we should be celebrating it because it's what exists as the status quo. Given that is not true, maybe something they could have said to prove this premise is that like priests have sort of a moral high ground because they are the one to reprimand people that are having sex. So that is the question we ask ourselves. Moving on to opening government, I think priests having conflicts and all that. That is what like the priest become, and it reflects it reflects on the image of the church. That is why we're so proud to propose.
Thank you so much, Government Whip, for a wonderful speech. And I'll invite the opposition whip to give their closing remarks.
Right. Thank you, Pano. I would like to confirm I'm being heard clearly.
Yes, you are.
Okay, sure. So, for the purposes of maybe knowing if my network is clear, I will try to read the motion. So, this house supports the requirement of clerical celibacy. I don't know if I'm being heard one more time so that I can go on. Pano, can you hear me? Just confirm I can go on now. Oh,
You can
sure.
go on.
Thank you. Okay, this house supports the climate supports the requirement of clerical celibacy. I'll begin my speech in the next 3, 2, 1 seconds. Okay, Pano, starting off in my speech, what are you going to get? You're going to get a rebuttal of the case of the closing government. But then again, you're going to get restructuring of the entire case as closing opposition, then the weighing of the debate from a speech of a opposition. So, Pano, starting off with what the government people said, he said that the Protestant church argument is not valuable. So I think I'm going to evaluate that in my case. And then he comes and says that Catholic Church is an exclusive community. Yes, but with unjustifiable rules that cause the problems that we're about to solve in this debate. But then again, they come and say that religion has living people, thus the spread of HIV. So that is true that people leave religions, yeah, but not as many Catholic, but not as many as how Catholics are losing people with their stringent and tight rules. But then again, they come and say you can't devote time at church and families. I find this laughable. Why? Because we have pastors doing this and they prosper, right? They have families and they have church. At the same time, Protestants do this and they prosper. So that is all laughable. They come and talk about the image of the church. So you see, you don't have the image of the Catholic Church if at all there's going to be divisions alongside clerical celibacy and kids or priests not taken care of. But that I'm going to engage in my course in my analysis. So going on into our case, you see what we come and show you here aside closing opposition, we come and give you the context of the debate. We give you a brief history that yes, clerical celibacy was there before with Catholics and all other denominations, but they left it a very long time ago. And we've seen other denominations like Protestants actually not having this kind of rules, but at the end of the day, they actually prosper. But then again, we come and show you what is the problem in this debate. And we believe the problem in this debate is on an analysis. The first one is the shrinking numbers of priests in Catholic churches. Why we're having very many of them leaving our churches. Then the next problem is division in ideology in churches. And the other problems are going to find in the stakeholders analysis, right? But going on into my case, you see, the very first justification for such a policy is that you know what, each person is suffering and happiness is unique to themselves, right? So if at all having sex or having children, having a family is fulfillment and happiness to a priest, then why refuse them at the end of the day? After all, you see, by refusing them, you're actually stopping them from enjoying their freedom of expression, right? Their freedom of actually having free choice, and that undermines the whole notion of enjoying the in one God in truth, in spirit and in truth, as a Christian say. But then again, we come and give the stakeholders analysis, right? Every first stakeholder here are the children of those clergy. You see, every time someone is not told to have sex, right, and biology comes and falls in, they will go and have sex in the wrong ways, right? They will go and have children aside, right, with not only with nuns, right, but can also have it with women in the community, right? And at the end of the day, we're going to have children, right? These children have a right to have parents, as the Constitution gives them that right. But again, they're not being taken care of. That affects our society. That affects the image of the whole Catholic Church. But then again, these people are going themselves. Then the stakeholder are the priests themselves. They're going to involve themselves in silent pleasures like alcoholism, drug abuse, and because they're going through problems like loneliness, right? They're going to have to compensate for that kind of emotional trauma they're having for not having children because they want to have the children, right? And they're asking themselves, how comes parents are having the children and parents just can't have them? There's so many questions they're having. And to make things worse, this is something that is celibacy. It's not something that is justifiable in the Bible. It's all out of speculation that Jesus Christ was single, so all of us have to be single. It's not actually justified because God says, go produce, fill the word, and subdue it. But again, we show you the other stakeholder is the public end of themselves, the congregation. You see, people want is the congregation themselves, right? What do they do if they hear that priests themselves are actually fighting that some want to have families, some don't want to have families? What do they do if they hear that priests have children and they don't take care of, right? They don't take care of, right? What the congregations do? Right? The congregations will end actually living that, and actually, as government has been saying, this part is supposed to be role models. That defeats the whole role model case. Why? Because the effects of this celibacy is not making them good role models when they have children that are being taken care of, when they have divisions at the end of the day. That in and of itself defeats the role model and the whole ethic of Christianity that's all about truthfulness. But then again, Paul, we're going to show you that yes, the priests themselves, we're going to show you that you see these children of the clergy, they're actually hidden. So they're actually more than the statistics. So before the kingdom came and told us that we should show them a statistic whereby these children are actually many. These children in and of themselves are hidden. So if we have a number showing that 30% of the children are hidden, are not being taken care of, we can actually have more. Why? Because the priests end up covering their footsteps. Why? Because they feel guilty at the end of the day. And that defeats their work. But you cannot do your work with a clear conscience, know that you have children on the side. That makes you discriminated from the whole class. You discriminate yourself, and if they find out, they chase you out and discriminate you, which defeats the whole entity of Christianity. But then again, you see, priests themselves cannot deliver well at the end of the day when they have these sexual urges, right? And they have a right to free will, right? They have a right to free will, and failure stops them from enjoying their rights, right? They have failure to have free will and freedom of expression, to have a family, to have sex when they want. It's not about family, but to pour this found somewhere. At the end of the day, that affects their right of free will, which affects their enjoyment of other freedom and rights, such as the right to worship in one God in spirit and in truth, and such as the right to cooperation or working together in their community. But again, to give you a comparative analysis, you see, people find happiness in addressing their sexual needs. People find happiness in very many things, right? We cannot actually premise the whole government case that says that people only find happiness, that the spirits only find happiness in serving God and they will not have distractions, right? But I think I can find happiness in serving God, and at the same time I can find happiness in having a family that will also serve God, that also learn from me, and that will have a legacy at the end of the day. But then again, part will be a comparative analysis. You see, the problems in the case of government that we have given, the division of churches, right? Shrinking number of priests in the Catholic Church, right? I will give you problems like children also not being taken care of and other analysis, right? It's not being solved in the world of the government, right? What they only show us that, you know what, abstinence is the best kind of thing, which we think clerical celibacy undermines other preventive HIV measures, and it only focuses pure not taken. And it only focuses on one thing known as abstinence, right? It undermines condom use, it undermines sensitization. Which we think we're better having a policy whereby we allow priests to have sex as they want to and teach them about other HIV preventive measures that also teach the churches at the end of the day. That is actually a workable force, right? Because we have preventive measures on our side than abstinence on only one side. But then again, Bano, we show you how clinical celibacy is not the best solution to the problems you have. You see, it's not biblically justified, first of all, as I've said. You see, the Bible says, go produce through the word, go produce through the word and subdue it. You see, in the Protestant church, it's not there, right? The church is up and it is running. It has been tried. I mean, this policy of ours has been tried and it is working. You see, we're showing you the core benefits from our side. You see, there's happiness and fulfillment. There's exercise of free choice. One can enjoy and all can end up enjoying other rights. There's justification for respect of minority rights of the few people who want to have children. But at the end of the day, we answer the main questions and the solutions in that case. We give the context analysis. You see, people like Martin Luther King, who broke monastic vows, have a good example of fulfillment when allowed to have a freedom of choice. The government policy does not entirely solve reproductive health, like allowing individuals free will and sensitizing them about other preventive measures, because abstinence is the hardest. Let's use preventive measure. We should use religious leaders, right, to teach the people about other preventive means other than focusing on only abstinence. But again, weighing the whole debate, what we get from the whole government debate is a repetition of cases like someone will work with anything of that sort, which we think does not work. So why do we deserve to rank higher in my last 15 minutes than our opposition? You see, we give you a deeper analytical analysis, right, of the cost-benefit analysis. We solve the problems in the debate, the questions in the debate, of which we think the whole government debate fails on doing that, when they only focus on one measure, abstinence, showing how bad family is, and showing us an example of taxation to justify celibacy, which is actually wrong and out of this debate. With that, back to rest my case. Thank you, Holy Spirit.
Okay, thanks much, Opposition Whip, for the critical remarks. Thank you so much, everyone who listened to the debate. And most importantly, thanks to our speakers of the day. It's been really an awesome debate. And so I'd like to encourage and judges in the room to join in, I think, in the judges' room as we deliberate. I think I'm going to seek some guidance, let alone or already known how you're going to get results later. Of course, not now, as they will be announced on the teams that are going to be breaking, and therefore you have to know maybe the position you have gotten. I would have wished so much to offer some feedback. Unfortunately, the rules won't allow me to. But when the results are out and you feel some any levels that feel contained, feel free to approach. It won't matter regardless of the time, the lag to have happened from when this debate happens and when you receive those results. Yeah, thanks so much. It's really been an awesome debate. Yeah, judges, we can join in the judges' room for deliberations. Yeah, thank you again. Have a good evening, everyone.
you